All right, everybody. Well, we're sitting down with Paul Olsen, Mark Stetson, Richard Taylor, and Jim Dow, who all were involved with the production of Star Trek the Motion Picture. And today I think we'll start out and ask the question from the entire group here. Who was the first one that became involved in the production, and how did all of you evolve and be brought over to the production after that?
Well, each one of us have our own story, but I think Jim was probably the first.
Probably we were brought in to at Magicam to develop models for the television series. We worked on it probably about a year, and got to a certain point. I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but we got to a certain point, and they had decided to go for a feature. And what we'd been building were strictly television models, and not intended for the big screen. So we had a wake for the project, and consumed 40 lobsters. Went home over the weekend and came back Monday morning and cleared everything out. And I started looking for more people, because now it had become a larger project. And so on. And I don't know how, I think Bob Abel got involved shortly after that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do remember, I'd worked for Bob years before. In fact, I set up his first slit scan that he bought from Doug Trumbull in the mid-70s.
Yeah, with Jimmy Dixon's camera track and all that.
Yeah. And so I was at Moose on Frames with Joe Matza. We were having lunch. Joe Matza and Carrie Melcher were having lunch, and the table over in the corner was Bob, and I forget who else was there. So I went over to say hi to Bob, and we had just found out that our project was going to feature film, so we were kind of discussing that, and we didn't know it, but Bob was sitting over in the corner discussing the fact that he was going after Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I went over and said hi, and what are you working on these days? And I can't really tell you, but it's something really big. Well, I can't tell you either, but it's something really big. Okay, and continued to have lunch. And then the rest is history now.
Well, I was at Robert Abel Studios. I started there in '73, and in 1979, we were approached to do the special effects for Star Trek the Feature. And so that was my first interface, is when we went over to Paramount to meet the producers, who happened to be Jeff
Katzenberg?
Katzenberg.
Yes,
yeah.
It was Jeff Katzenberg's first film as a producer.
Yeah.
And to meet Robert Wise, Robert Wise wasn't on the film yet, to meet Gene Roddenberry, and to generally get a lay of the land, meet the art department, see what had been developed for the film. Well, I was the main designer at Abel Studios, so we went over to take a look, and part of that whole process was going to the Magicam model shop, which had already started working on the television show. I think Star Trek the Feature evolved as a result of the success of Star Wars the movie, and the studio kind of had a knee-jerk reaction to turn this television feature into a full-blown feature. So a lot of work had gone into prepping that. They had built some sets, and they had a model underway, and these guys were working on that project. So when I came in, we had to all kind of step back and take a look at it in terms of the quality that now is happening in motion pictures, Star Wars for sure. The new evolution of the way of shooting models, having motion control, building models that were much more complex, of a whole other scale, to be able to get close to them. So we all had to look at that at one time. It was my job to kind of look at the models and redesign them in a way to work for the feature. So that's when I met Jim and all the work they had done. And I was thrilled, to say the least, that I was working with these guys, because they were pros, they had done a lot of work, and they had developed other technology at Magicam. So they were pretty sharp guys, and they had an aesthetic, and so that was when I first got involved.
Okay. And Mark?
Mine's a bit more straightforward than that. I started bugging Jim to get on that crew somewhere around the beginning of 1978, and
Yeah.
with all the with the sort of the success of Star Wars and the sort of the public recognition of Star Trek once it had been elevated to a motion picture status, that had caught the eye of the union establishment in Hollywood, and it was hard for Jim to hire me. It took 5 months of waiting and pestering on my part, and trying on Jim's part to wait for a window of time when
Lunches with the union president.
It's been pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Finally, there was a point where the union was at full employment, and Jim was allowed to hire me as a specialist permit.
Right.
So, and then I ended up working on the picture for 3 different companies for a year and a half. Got all my hours in that I needed to become a full #1 card-carrying journeyman in the prop makers union.
Quite an accomplishment in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's just where you began.
May
Right.
78.
We've got a lot more to talk to about with Mark about that and the rest of his career. And Paul, how did you become involved with the picture?
Jim had had grown up with and gone to school with a very, very famous airbrush illustrator named Charlie White, who had a studio on Santa Monica Boulevard, and a friend of mine shared the studio with him, who was an airbrush illustrator named Ed Scarisbrick. And Jim, you called Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we got to the point where we were reaching the primer stage, and we had nobody on staff. That we had so much work to do that we needed to hire someone to come in and focus on paint, nothing
Right.
else. So I called Charlie.
But Susanna was working on it, wasn't she?
Yeah,
She had made
yeah.
a start.
She was kind of priming.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she actually she painted a lot of the Klingon and did a good job, but we needed her hands in the model shop.
Right.
I need somebody to just focus on paint. So I called Charlie, thinking that I could lure Charlie over, because anyway, we have a long relationship, and he's on a roller coaster ride, and I thought I could buy his time for a month. You know, I thought, well, it'll only take him.
Yes. Just knock it out.
Yeah.
Well, that laughter is because of the complexity of the paint job on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the highlight on a painting. It's the last thing, the detail that's there. And in the case of the Enterprise, the paint job was an exceptional challenge because the paint job in the end is what gave it scale.
Mm-hmm.
When you have really smooth surfaces of things, and if you don't have some form of detail, you have no sense of scale.
Yeah.
So the Enterprise with these big sweeping curves, especially the saucer, and that's where his expertise came in, and us figuring out the patterning of those designs and coming up with the paint pigments and the way of applying them and all that. It was we were inventing it as we did it.
So I called Charlie, and Charlie says, "Well, I can't put the time into it, but I've got somebody else here." I don't know if he handed the phone to you or if he
No,
called
he
you back.
he handed the phone to Ed, because they were in the same room and they
Yeah.
faced each other,
Yeah.
And then he said to Ed, he says, "Don't you
Don't you know
have a
somebody?"
friend of yours who's looking for work, who's
Yeah.
pretty good with an airbrush?" And then Ed said, he got your details, and
Yeah.
he gave me a call, and so I'm at my studio in the La Bamba house up on the top of the Silver Lake Hills, and picked up the phone. He goes, "Paul, it's Ed. How would you like to paint a Starship Enterprise?"
Let me think.
Yeah. Give me a minute, will you? So, and that was it. And
So
then
you came out with some,
I came down to see you, and
yeah.
I showed you my stuff, and you
Yeah.
said, you know, I think you'll do, and Jim led me down the hallway and
We just built
a spray booth.
yeah, spray
Yeah. And it was just down the hallway on the right before you walked into the main model room. And there she was, you know, as I said, with her wings spread, waiting for me to have my way with her.
Yeah. What are you waiting for?
Looking very much like she looked in the dry dock
Yeah.
on the film.
Right.
And Jim said, I mean, it was a heart-stopping moment. You know, I mean, here I was with the Enterprise, and it was up to me, and I had to take a big gulp, and I remember thinking, you know, Jesus, I'm really in deep here. And then Jim said that hadn't you restored or repainted, was it a 1935 Ford?
Yeah, yeah.
And you used pearlescent colors.
Right, yeah, and that's,
And then you suggested
right.
I do that. And then
So we started playing with pearls.
that's right, yeah. And
Well,
And then-
it was, that stuff was all made by Crescent, wasn't it?
yeah,
Metal
yeah,
Powder?
Crescent. And they made
Yeah.
4 different colors.
Well, plus they made pigments though, incredible iridescent pigments
Yeah.
of all kinds, and yeah, that stuff was incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they still make it.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. And,
Broad range of color now.
and they were, I remember, for a 4-ounce bottle, they were $48 each,
Yeah,
which
they
was
were-
a lot of money.
Yeah,
And I,
well, because they were actually made with ground pearl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they're iridescent.
yeah,
You know, the thing that people see when you look at a seashell that
Yeah.
has that iridescence on
yeah,
it, that's what the pigments were.
Yeah.
So when
Actually
you look
pearl
at
powder.
the Enterprise at angles and the light would reflect it, each of those little panels had a different reflectivity and a different iridescent quality.
I think that's a good subject to talk about, because since the film was released on the big screen, the versions that fans have had to look at over the years until recently with the advent of Blu-ray and the reproduction of the film in its fine quality and high detail like that, there was never really a lot of people that were aware that ship actually had that iridescent paint job on it. People just see a white ship with a couple little panels on it, and when you go back and look at now the Blu-ray and you see that thing coming out of the dry dock, it just jumps right out at you. Now, I want to go back just a little bit and ask Jim a couple of questions. Going back, because with Star Trek fans, there's kind of what we call a missing link, and the missing link is with Star Trek Phase 2. Very little is known about what was going on to that point, with especially the design of the ships, and how some of those maybe design cues, maybe on your point, Richard, if you looked at that model and carried those over to the final version of the refit that you guys went with on the film. Can you maybe talk about a little of that and how that all worked out?
The evolution of the refit.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What's was Phase 2, is that the sort of the TV reunion movie that had the Don Luce model in it, or what was that? I don't know what Star Trek
I don't know.
Phase
You're
2
referring
was.
to Phase 2 is just
Phase 2
Our ship.
is what the television show was going to be before it got turned
Oh,
into the movie.
oh,
That's what
okay,
they
okay.
officially.
So the model that existed that I saw, the small
For-
model of the Enterprise, it was
Yeah.
out, not at your shop.
right.
It was out at
No,
Don Luce's or someplace.
that's right. It was Don Luce. That's the
And,
name I was searching for. Yeah.
And, but they had already started working on certain models.
We were doing the dry dock. We'd begun making sketches for the Klingon because we got the original Klingon back from the museum and found that the wings were 2 different sizes and it wasn't symmetrical and so on. So we started doing sketches on the Klingon. Some of the other craft we were thinking about, but the Enterprise, as far as we were concerned, was being built by Don Luce.
So I can kind of jump in on that to help you there. So when we got involved, again, like I said, we had to analyze everything that existed that was built and see what would work. And the answer was nothing,
Yeah.
really. I mean, if you looked at the quality of Star Wars or 2001, and compared it to what they were building, it was actually embarrassing. So,
I'll just kind of back up for a second. When we were originally involved with an eye toward doing it for television, we were Magicam, and Magicam was a state-of-the-art, cutting-edge video system, but it was video only, no film. And what we could do was take live action on a blue stage and put it into a miniature in the background, and do traveling mats in real time in video.
With match moves on the miniature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Scaled
And-
match moves on the
And
miniature. It was
the
amazing.
director would direct from a monitor, which gave him an instant composite. So
It
you
was
had
virtual
your-
production 35 years ago.
Like Carl
Yeah.
Sagan's Cosmos.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Alexandria Library.
So,
That's written.
so this is what we were
Yeah.
building models for, was we were building models for the Magicam system because it was our intention as a company to do the new Star Trek series for television with our video process, and that's as far as it was going to go. When it went to film, then we still wanted to retain the model contract because there were two portions of Magicam, one the video system and the other the model shop, and model shop was my thing, and I was trying to build it into as a self-sufficient entity. So that's okay, that's the background up to then it was, of course, Abel wanted to do the models in-house also, which was totally understandable. So it became kind of a contest between, and then we worked it out once we got to know each other and moved ahead.
Right, and thank God we did.
Yeah.
So, when I first saw the models, I mean, and I understood the context of what they were building them for. So my value judgments on what they were building weren't that they weren't well built or anything. I mean, the designs were designed for a particular function. Now that all had changed. So the Enterprise, of course, I wanted to see immediately, and it wasn't there. And I knew that we were going to have to redesign everything. You know, upgrade the Klingons. You know, everything had to have this whole level of detail. But the Enterprise had never seen. And the models they were building were quite large, many of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally went out to see it, and it just wouldn't work. I mean, it was not as long as this table, about half as long as this table here, and you know, maybe about 4 feet long, something like that. Had no lighting systems built
was
into
like
it.
Fiberglass and plywood.
Fiberglass and plywood and stuff, and he had actually done a couple of things that I kind of ran with a little bit more. The dimension of the saucer and the nacelles, he hadn't really gotten into the detail of them, but they were still cylindrical. And so anyway, that's what we saw, and we came back and basically said, we've got to build, I mean, this is the queen of the movie. This is, as you said earlier, I mean, the first movie showed a lot of that model. So, and we had Star Wars and that as a primer on how we would do this. So getting together with Jim and Magicam was really fun because we literally started drawing the blueprints from scratch. I could get into a lot about what we tried to do with the Enterprise, but the very nature of what the Enterprise is, to me, is fascinating. I watched the television show when I was in college, and the first time I ever saw the Enterprise, I went, what a weird looking thing that is. My dad was an Air Force officer. Spaceships and rockets and things were like the V2, and then there was Buck Rogers and all this stuff. But the design, the configuration of it was just so unusual. I mean, it had the saucer, and I said, well, why isn't it just a saucer? But they had the fuselage and then these nacelles. And, you know, when I first saw the show, I was like, how does that work? And why does it look that way? And that configuration permutated and still does to the very latest movies where they went back and really brought back that configuration
It's really
again.
unique. It's really
Yeah.
unique.
Mhm.
It's really beautiful.
Now, as a designer, when I looked at it, and as soon as I knew we were doing Star Trek, I started reading a lot about space structures and how the first thing you learn is that anything, if I put this glass in the air in outer space, it would spin around its center of gravity. Well, the center of gravity of the Enterprise is the most unbalanced object in the history of outer space. You would never, ever design something like that. to go
Sorry,
to outer
folks.
space.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the saucer, fine, but it's just an incredibly unbalanced object, which was a problem when we built the model as far as armaturing it from the rear or the front. You got the torque of that whole thing. So it's a really strange configuration. And when we started to do a new design, my first question to Roddenberry was, well, I'd like to do a bunch of sketches of different possibilities. And he said, no, it has to have that configuration. And I said, well, can I streamline it? Can I? He said, yes, you can. You know,
What can we do?
But you have to keep the saucer, the strut, and the lower fuselage, the struts, and the nacelles. And so that was a given that it had to be that configuration.
Okay. And when did you? I remember hearing you guys talk about it in the earlier interviews that maybe you would have liked to seen that model been a little bit bigger. It wound up what, something like 8 feet, Jim?
Yeah.
You would have liked to seen a little bit bigger for the.
Right. At one time, I had a tape drawing that I did in my office that was 12 feet long, and that was kind of the vision that I had for it. But the reality of shooting that with motion control and armatured from 4 or 5 different positions, and weight and so on and so forth, we settled on an 1 inch to 10 feet scale, and which made it about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, which was a scale that you know, I kind of prefer 1.5 inches to the foot. But it was a scale I felt we could work with, and I think it worked out fine. The ship came. I was just rereading those notes that I gave to you, and amazingly enough, because of the armature that we built and so on, the ship came out at about 80 pounds when it left our facility. Probably weighed more like 100 pounds in the end. With
Amount of Bondo and junk that was put on it.
yeah,
Maybe only 10 pounds of extra junk.
Yeah.
But it was quite a bit.
but it's very strong,
Yes.
well engineered, beautifully built. That thing was built to last forever.
Yeah, the internal weldment that you guys made,
Yeah,
the ring
it's
and all
all
that, it's
Heliarc
armature?
aluminum. Yeah.
the
So,
interior.
a lot of people may not know that. Jim, could you maybe talk about that a little bit? That it has an internal structure.
Yeah. The internal structure was the main body is a cylinder of 1/2 inch thick, 1/2 inch wall aluminum tube.
About a 4-inch cylinder, so maybe 5-inch, something like that, wasn't it?
I believe it was about 5 inches.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In the
Probably about-
fuselage part.
Probably about 3 feet long.
Yeah, in the fuselage, and probably 30 inches long or so. And the neck is 1/2 inch aluminum plate.
Like a single blade going up trapezoidal
Right.
shape.
Mhm. And then the saucer ring was 1.5 inch thin wall aluminum tube bent in a circle. Everything's Heliarc together. The struts for the nacelles were 1/2 inch aluminum skinned with styrene. And then the nacelles were built up out of a variety of materials, clear acrylic and so on.
Okay.
And it's a damn good thing that it was built like that, because I think on at least 3 occasions, when dropping a paint bottle or whatever, and I stood up and bang, hit that thing. And
Pretty solid.
it
huh?
was like,
She
and then
just
the
kinda-
cells are going doing, 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 doing.
Yeah, she kind of vibrates.
Yeah.
And
Like a tuning fork.
if one fell off, I was out the door to Mexico.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it was
the,
solid.
you just take it was designed to be armatured from the side, well, from
Yeah,
5 sides.
actually both sides,
Yeah.
bottom, front, rear.
Right,
Yeah.
not the top, but all the other. So,
Everything off the bottom section is just the engineering section, right?
Yes. So now if you put that thing on the armature from the rear back through the cargo bay, and there's a
Yeah.
fuselage going out there, then the strut, and then
All the
thing
weight
out.
is all
Now you say
cantilevered
that
up.
thing weighs 80
That's
pounds,
scary,
but
yeah.
the torque on this is way more than 80
Yeah.
pounds.
300-400 pounds.
300 or 400 pounds. And then,
Yeah.
you know, it had to roll or do some things like that in certain shots. And there's a difference between rolling a model, because the way the light changes, versus moving the camera to say you're rolling. So
Right.
But they did a great job of building that, and then all the electrical circuitry that was built into it on top of that, because
Had to go out any one of those,
Right, that's what I was, going to ask about. So was there a main umbilical where the power came in that was kind of always kept in the same spot, or did it
No,
go
it
in
had to-
depending on
well,
which
it had
shooting
to-
angle?
it had to go out
But
of
functionally,
whichever
the way it ended up being shot, it primarily lived off its right armature mount.
Right.
And we actually sealed up the
Sealed
left
up
side
port
completely.
side, Yeah.
And then I think towards the end of the show, opened that up for one shot. But for most of the show, it just
Primarily, I think we see the port side of the ship
Correct.
quite a bit.
That's
yeah.
why.
Correct.
Yeah, just a convenience. And the storytelling worked out that way, but it was a convenience of
that was the side that was
Keeping the
featured
side
in the
finished.
dry dock,
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
the docking.
yeah.
So those light circuits, for people who aren't into miniature photography and all that, the reason is that you need different circuits for different exposures, and with motion control, you can make a pass just for the windows, one for the nacelles, one for the thrusters or whatever, or the strobes or whatever you want. And that way you can control exactly the exposure. To try and balance lights out and the key light on the thing all in one exposure, very difficult. So again, that's the technology that was evolving that these guys were building this model for. And that had to apply to the Klingons, to the Space Ops Complex, the Vulcan shuttle, and all the rest of them.
Okay.
So it's primarily neon and incandescent bulbs. And the incandescent bulbs went
A whole
significantly
variety.
below grain of rice bulbs down to these little tiny axiolite watch
Axiolite.
bulbs. They were made for these newfangled digital watches that were coming out in the 1970s. And they'd have these tiny little lights. They were like less than an eighth of an inch long. And they had a little tiny lead off each end, and they just made this beautiful little light source. But they're so low exposure, they had to run the camera. If the camera took 1 second to expose the entire Enterprise body, it might take 5 seconds to shoot to expose the
Well, that's very
much light.
axiolite.
Yeah, we would, as just observers, we would think that you would have the lights all on the thing and you just make one pass and get the lights and that's it. So
No.
you had to literally take sections of lighting and blend that together and
Right.
filter it just right. Well, that's
Each
very
lighting
interesting.
system was a separate exposure,
Mhm.
rewinding the film. But the other part of it is that the thing that was added that they did in Star Wars for the first time was on a motion control camera, the shutter opens and the camera's moving, and so you get motion blur instead of that stop action look that Harryhausen or anything else would. So
Mhm.
now when something moves, it had motion blur. So that's being added every time you're making a pass on the lights. and stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask Jim a little bit more in just a second about some of the materials that the model was made out of and some of those things. But Richard, could you talk a little bit more detail about some of the things that you maybe bounced back and forth with Gene Roddenberry about on the model, as far as some of the ideas you maybe took to him and what he kind of went for and what he didn't go for and some of the reasons for that?
Yes.
A wry smile.
Well, Gene Roddenberry is not a designer, and I guess he was, he's been an airline pilot or something.
Yeah.
And
Bomber
so-
pilot in World War II.
Right, so he knew airplanes and those kind of things, but I had done a lot of research about and talked to, and we even had astronauts come in as a part of the production meetings to talk over spacecraft. But whenever you design something by committee, you're in for a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
And I was the main designer for the Aero Studios, but I hired Chris Ross and some different really great guys out of Art Center, and I can draw, and I actually drew the first blueprints for the Enterprise, not all the other models, but and Andy Probert and other people that I brought on, but I really researched the history of Star Trek. I wasn't really a Star Trek fan from the television. Some of the episodes I liked, but others, in any case, so here we were to look at it analytically, what to do to it. So the first thing that I wanted to talk to him about was scaling, and that I wanted to redesign the nacelles, and really, because the whole philosophy of the way the ship theoretically works is those nacelles have anti-gravity material in them. They create a pocket or a bubble, if you wish, in space that the Enterprise surfs on the front of. And it has a downrange deflector to get shit out of the way, asteroids or anything they would hit going at
Right.
great speeds. So, all this technology is like, yeah, I'm expected back on planet Earth. But it's science fiction. So we try and build into it things that tell you that, what it does. And so one of the first things was the doors to the Enterprise. This is the one he really threw me a curveball with. He insisted that the doors on the Enterprise were 12 feet in diameter and circular. And, you know, when you're not, first I said, circular, you know? He said, yes. And I said, well, then can the iris open? No, they can't iris open. Okay, so this shuttle that's going to come up and deposit them has to have at the back of it a 12-foot in diameter circular door, you know? Anybody who makes a spacecraft, you don't make doors any bigger, and also that's how it had to dock. And so the way that it had to work was that the doors were actually in the skin of the craft that docked, and then they slid into the walls of the Enterprise. So, you know, the doors really couldn't open, or so it was a very strange design. So the Vulcan shuttle had to have that, where it docked with the bridge. I thought that was a pretty. Other than that, other than staying within the configuration, and I showed him sketches along the way, he went along with the majority of it. I tried to really make the thing have more of an Art Deco kind of feel to it, more horizontal, a lot of parallel lines and things, and he bought into all that. The only place where we really had some real conflicts was the bridge, because we had to design the model, and we got involved, the Able Studio, in designing some of the sets around the Enterprise, and the bridge being one because we were going to be doing the effects that were going to be on the, you know, on the view screen and on around the interior. And I had seen that the evolution of technology was tactile, and that in the future we were going to have tactile interactive consoles and not hard switches and buttons and, you know, toggle switches. And I had suggested that to him, and he absolutely flat out said no. I said, but we could have graphic stuff happening that would be really interesting, visible. And he said, no, I want buttons and switches. And he literally dictated in many cases what they were, and they were pretty old school. The other part was that in the Star Trek features, or the television series, I just would always die laughing because every emergency they got into, they're acting like they're falling, but
No
they're always
seatbelts.
standing up, no
Yeah.
seatbelts.
Yeah.
And every airline pilot and everybody, you know, when you get in turbulence,
Yeah.
so I said to him, could we design the chairs so that they had a seatbelt or some way of keeping the people in? And he finally went for that. So the chairs actually folded over that in a way. And then lastly, around the perimeter of the bridge was all the control consoles where Sulu and everybody worked. And again, I thought we could do tactile. He said no. But I wanted to have kind of rectilinear screens that went around. And he said, no, I want circular screens. He had this whole thing for circles and ovals.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but sir, you know what, a round screen is maybe the most least efficient for getting the most material there. He said, God damn it, I don't care. Round the screen. Okay.
That's what he was used
So
to.
then, and he wanted stuff that was kind of flickery, abstract, not really specific graphic-y stuff, but it was, you know, kind of what was on the original Enterprise. We were able to upgrade it some, but
He was thinking his design reference was an oscilloscope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So that were some of the limitations that were put on it. So the 12-foot in diameter door really threw us a curve, because I thought, frankly, the guppy, as I call it, that the whole tour around that brought Scotty and Kirk up to do the whole tour around was a really ugly piece of hardware.
Travel pod?
The travel pod,
yeah.
The
The travel
travel
pod.
pod, because you had to
Yeah.
see them. So
Yeah.
it had to have a big front window. It needed lights on it, but it had to have a 12-foot in
I'll tell you,
diameter
that
door on the back.
12-foot diameter door came in really handy when they had to do rear projections of.
That's
Yeah,
true.
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice big opening to.
Exactly.
Inside, yeah.
So we built
Mark,
it
talk
so
about
that-
that a little bit, how that was done, that effect was done where you got Kirk and Scotty to appear on the front of
Yeah.
that windshield in that thing.
Well, it's really just
That
straight
model
up,
was about this big.
It was
Yeah.
done in 2001 first.
straight up rear projection into
Yeah.
the model.
Right.
And so you have footage of Kirk and Scotty doing their little tour of the Enterprise, shot on stage, and then that is put into a film projector that is synced to the motion control that's shooting the travel pod. And using rear projection into the back of a model like that limits the amount of motion you can convincingly portray on the front of the model. You know, the shooting angle can't change that much, but basically you cut out a hand fit projection screen, rear projection screen into the model physically, and sync project the footage onto it while you're shooting the front. It's all driven by
Very
motion
interesting.
control. Yeah. It was a great picture of the setup in Cinefex, actually.
Oh, great. And Jim, getting back to the construction of the model a little bit, what was the, I guess if you'd want to say, you don't have to, not every little detail, but what were the
Yeah.
main elements of the
Well,
construction?
basically, most of it was vacuum formed. We used a variety of materials, styrenes and butyrates, that were selected for the amount of heat they were going to be subjected to. The main body was butyrate, which was clear. It was important that it be clear so that we didn't have to cut in windows and so on.
Oh, interesting, very
Yeah,
interesting. Mhm.
for lighting. And then it had to be able to take the heat of our ancient lighting systems that we had.
Were
in
those
days,
cathode
which were-
tubes, some of those
Well,
things?
no, we had neon, which wasn't a problem, but the problem was the incandescence. And we used grain of wheat and tiny little axial lights, and which are extremely hot. Little,
And then they're in a
little
confined,
lamps. Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
an enclosed space with no ventilation. And so it was a matter of not knowing what kind of temperatures we were going to have inside this thing. So we kind of overbuilt the ship to be able to take whatever it was that we were going to be giving it. The saucer is styrene, which is a lower temperature material, but we didn't have that much lighting in the saucer, so it wasn't necessary for it to be higher temperature. A variety of thermal form plastics. The nacelles were hand built. I believe the front and the tail were vacuum formed pieces, skins.
There was lights inside of it for the interior glow.
Yeah, and the
Heat exchanger part.
yeah, the heat exchanger. Thank you.
We
Don't
call
ask
those
me.
the chiller grills,
Yeah.
the lit
Yeah,
area?
well, the kind of
I was trying to make that look like a big magnet.
Uh-huh.
that was actually milled aluminum, and so on. Just a wide variety of.
There's a couple things there. One of the things was the windows around the perimeter of the saucer and some other places we built out for the rec room or whatever it was, some other things where you, if we ever got close enough, there would be something there that actually parallaxed when you went by. And so the perimeter of the saucer had, I believe, 1/8-inch plexi windows and a neon tube around there, and there were transparencies in there.
35
set
millimeter
pieces.
slides and cut them.
39, and so that means Mickey Mouse is in there.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
everything
gosh.
you
stuff.
could.
There's always, yeah,
If
there's always
anybody
been a lot
really
of
looked,
curiosity
you know,
about
we
that.
would have lost our job, but anyway.
Yeah, right.
It's in there, there's some secrets in there, some
There's some
are
secrets in
Easter
there.
eggs.
Sort of time capsule kind of thing.
But the nacelles, to me, were the thing that really changed the Enterprise.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
spent more time on the
Mhm.
design of that than anything. Trying
Yeah.
to get it more rectilinear and to have, just a different look.
Oh,
And the big change up
aesthetic
front
really
was
pretty.
the deflector too. That's so characteristic of the refit now that you see that big blue guy coming at you in the front now
Oh.
versus the old
Mm.
kind of radar looking dish that used to be
Yeah.
on the original model.
Mhm.
The,
That's another question I had. The colors that were arrived at and all that. Now there's some strange, if you go back and look, and I don't know if it's maybe filtering that they used on some publicity shots, but you go back and look at some of the early like production shots or pre-production shots of the refit, you'll see that the grills were like violet, and then in other shots they're blue, and then there's some different shading going on with the deflector dish. And did you guys build that in originally where it made that transition from the amber color when it's sitting there kind of idling to where it goes to warp and turns to blue? Is that done in post-production, or is that something?
We use that pattern fluid. What's that pattern fluid you call that blue?
Right,
pattern fluid?
yeah.
We use that on the grills.
On the grills, yeah. That was
Dicom.
Dicom. Yeah.
Oh, Dicom.
Just Dicom.
Yeah, that was what it was on the aluminum, Dicom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dicom's what you put on
It's a-
aluminum to scribe it when machinists.
yeah.
It's got a beautiful rich
It's a
blue color.
trend.
Yeah.
The aluminum had the machining marks, so it had an iridescence of its own before it was coated. And then the dicom is a very dark blue translucent material. It's a lacquer-based material. That was sprayed on over the aluminum, so some of the iridescence of the aluminum came through the blue of the dicom. So in lighting that, that probably is why you see some other colors appearing.
Very interesting.
And-
For your transcript, it's DYKEM.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Very interesting.
it's a transparent
Dye.
lacquer
Yeah, transparent dye like lacquer.
used for scribing and marking and machining.
Boyd, I would just, interrupting, I would like to say that we're here at Mark and Leslie's house, and Mark very kindly offered to have us come together here. And we're missing someone who is a very important part of the family here, and that's Ron Gress, who did what's now called, we called it the engineering section, but Ron Gress designed and painted the Strongback section in Floquo paints. And then went on to work with Mark when they had some problems with the air conditioning system and everything whilst I was, had gone on to do some of the special effects. When they had problems with the model, then Ron, who's a superbly accomplished artist, I mean, he's really good, then these two worked together to patch up little bits and problems they had with the Enterprise whilst they were shooting it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate Ron couldn't be with us today. We had some questions for him about the, you guys call it the garden, we call it the Arboretum. That's the area in the belly of the ship that's like a park-like setting. And I had a couple questions for him about what he actually, I remember seeing in the last interview that he mentioned how much he kind of started off with just a basic project, but really started getting into it and getting involved in all the little details of adding the trees and every little thing that's in there. And there's not really a clear shot of that on the movie. When the ship flies by, you just kind of see a little glimpse of it. And
That's about how it should have been.
party going on in there.
I left Star Trek with the realization that if we saw 10% of what we had built on the screen,
Yeah.
then we had succeeded. You
Mhm.
know, you had just
Yeah.
you overbuilt it because it had to fulfill so many different shots and angles.
And you never knew
You
what
never
they
knew.
were
Never
going to
knew
do.
what
Right.
was
What-
gonna
what
be.
would-
Which the 10% would be.
Exactly.
Right.
But that seemed about right. About 10%, I was happy. Yeah.
That's great. Well, getting into the painting a little bit more then, so you mentioned that Ron did the strong back area of the ship.
Yes.
And then there were some other areas of detail on painting on the model too, with different colored panels and things. And then you had what was the basic hull color? Was it just an off-white or a
Started out as white.
just
Yeah,
white?
Basically a primer, white primer.
Over to Mark.
Yeah, it's Paramount. Was that Paramount Paints? Paramount
Right,
plastic primer.
Paramount
I hated that
plastic primer.
stuff because it was so grainy.
Yeah.
And you were
Yeah.
involved with that, Mark? You did all that primary painting?
Well, all of us did a lot of priming
Yeah,
on it.
that was just the basic.
But every time you laid another coat of prime on that thing, you had to chase out all the all the
Right.
scribe lines on like the entire
Yeah.
ship. It was just like, ugh,
Hmm.
hated that stuff. We all had really nice scribing tools by the end of that project.
Mhm.
It was a lovely, I mean, once Mark and the boys got done with panels they were working on, I mean, they were as smooth and perfect, well, they had to be, but they were, and just an ideal surface on which to apply lacquer with an airbrush. I mean, and the lacquer, as you're applying it, because the thinner is also the solvent, the paint is constantly melting into itself, and so it just bonds, and you get just the most wonderful surface, and it'll reflect whatever imperfections are on
Oh, sure.
underneath. So I mean,
Yeah.
these guys just nailed it.
Perfections, that, for example, again, when you look at the saucer and its backlit and you have that sheen coming, any little piece of dust or anything shows up, and it's a scale killer.
It looked
And
like a
we
boulder
didn't
sitting
have
on top.
digital
Yeah,
right.
that close.
cleanup or anything. Everything that we did in those days was on camera. And yeah, we did opticals and things that actually degraded the image some. So in any case, it was a very unforgiving shooting situation, and so difficult to paint that thing I mean, when he painted stuff, that sometimes the thing was, you know,
Yeah.
upside down
Right.
and stuff. So that model had to be built so strong to be able to, just sit there for days while he
Yeah,
was working on
that's
different
right.
sections.
And how long did it take you to complete that paint job, Paul?
6 months, but then someone, and I think I know who it was, but someone came in and screwed around with the electronics module, the big, you know, the
It had a
master unit.
console. It had a console as big as a speaker's rostrum. It was huge.
Yeah.
It was like 5 feet or 4.5 feet tall.
On rollers.
About
The lighting
18
control
inches
system?
wide, just
Yeah.
for lighting. Yeah, just a
And-
big giant control
and-
for lighting. All the transformers and everything in it.
So something
a big
had
umbrella
blown.
about this thick would travel from the model.
Something had blown, and they had to go in and do surgery and then seal it up again, and so I had to. So that was another 2 months. But it was a 6-month job. But that, you know, 2/3 of that was working 7 days a week, 12, 16 hours a day.
Wow.
It was also opened up again. Doug had some ideas for the model self-illuminating. Like you see on airliners coming in, they turn on their landing lights and they have
Yeah.
the tail lights on the
Yeah,
tail
yeah.
and on the wings and, you know, the beautiful little flights. And so we put a lot of that stuff. Was that your idea or Doug's idea?
It was mine, and then he carried it farther out. He added those extra quarters pieces on the saucer on
The underside, that little thing?
the rectangular.
Yeah,
But the ion engine was actually a nice addition to the design of the thing. As you probably well know, the saucer was designed to, it can eject, it had its own landing gear and could be powered by the ion engine and stuff, which, I don't know, in one of the features, didn't it finally do that or something?
Sure does.
But, so it was designed as a totally self-sufficient craft. But the ion engine, I thought, was a nice design in the way we lit it.
Yeah, it was pretty. I like
Yeah.
that too.
Well, when they started getting into when you started getting into the painting, then Paul, could you describe like a typical day that you would spend from start to finish of what you would work with each day when you were going through that process?
Well, the beauty of working, airbrushes are a real pain in the neck, and you have to keep them clean, and when you finish working with them, you have to clean them all out. But working with lacquer, I didn't. All I had to do was run a bit of lacquer thinner through the airbrush, and I could just leave it with the little bottle of whatever color paint I was working on overnight. And so, say during the middle to the end part of the painting process when we were at Maxella, I lived probably 10 miles, 15 miles away, and I would take my motorcycle because I could zip through any traffic, but I would leave at night, basically go home, crash, get up early in the morning, have a shower, get on the bike, well, get dressed, get on the bike, and come right back out to Maxella.
I'm glad you got dressed.
Yeah, thank you. And then it was, the model shop was great because we all worked cheek by jowl. Remember at Seward when we were all cramped in that little room?
Yeah.
And there would be like 4 or 5 of us working on the Enterprise, and we all got on. It was just a pleasure to go to work, and to work with such knowledgeable, talented people who really knew their stuff. And we're all really nice, and we'd all go out to lunch together, and it was just the most wonderful experience. I really, really liked it. And you'd just be working all day. I mean, just, you had to. Everybody was working, and
You
we
worked
had
as
a
many
deadline.
hours as you could produce.
Yeah.
And you were sort of on your own to do that, but
Yeah, I was
the
gonna say, I'd
deadline
like
was.
to ask each of you what what your day was like. I know you don't go in there and work on just one thing. You're gonna be doing a lot of different things, right?
Well, Mark certainly was.
Well, my context was that I didn't work at the model shop. I was based out of the Able Studios, and I was kind of moving continually. I had a large art department. We were storyboarding the movie. We were designing set pieces. We were getting involved in actually more than we should have. That's one of the reasons that we didn't continue on the picture. But in any case, so I was kind of making a cycle, and I would visit the model shop daily, or it was really up to them when there was stuff to really review for us to. I mean, there was no point in me over there just hanging out watching the paint dry, so to speak. So we all had our kind of cyclical, kind of work that we would do. It's generally how all businesses work, but in the film industry, well, one of the nice things about working in those days is it was the analog year and everything, so changing something was a big deal.
Mhm.
Now we create by change. People do it all the time, just like that, with CG models and all that. So everything had to be well planned and well thought out, and building that model was the key.
Talking about that subject a little bit, talking a little bit about all of you that have input on that, about how things were evolving and changing, kind of ad lib along the way, that you guys were getting different script changes and things like that that directly affected what you guys were doing.
Well, yeah, on my side it was incredibly daunting because the art department and from Roddenberry's side, they just made the assumption that you could just kind of change things, but designing the effects for a picture, then storyboarding them out, because storyboarding are the angles you're going to shoot, what you're going to build, and when you change a script and have to go back through it, and first of all, Ed Verreau, who has become one of the top production designers in the industry, storyboarded that movie for me, and drawing the Enterprise over and over again in a storyboard is insane. It's a very difficult thing to draw. When it gets at any weird acute angles, you got ovals and angles, it's like, and so we reboarded the movie at least 3 times, and then after Trumbull took the movie over, then that whole Spock's spacewalk thing changed again. And it's very difficult to plan things well, and that's the thing I learned on that movie, is it was not well organized overall in that kind of context. When I reviewed models or sets or anything, I took them to a meeting that had Gene Roddenberry, the director, assistant director of production, the people from the art department, who were not happy with us because I came in and said those sets don't work, and
Nobody wants to hear that.
Nobody wanted to hear that. So they were always fighting us. But in any case, there was a committee of about 8 to 10 people sitting there to look at every design, and then this free-for-all discussion would begin. And when they'd have astronauts, they would say, "Well, Mr. Taylor's design is exactly correct there," and then Roddenberry would say, "But that's not the way it's going to be in the future." And
I know.
And I would bring in footage that MIT had done, try and emulate what something would look like when it approached the speed of light, and I'd show that, and he'd say, "No, that's not what happens when things go to the speed of light." I'd say, "Well, at MIT they're kind of thinking that, it's, no, in the future what's going to happen?" And everybody go, "Okay." So he would tell astronauts, "No, that's not the way it's going to be in the future."
Yeah.
And so this committee would vote, and I've learned after a while to, whatever I really wanted to be the design, I would bury it about 8 deep.
Yeah.
And they'd say, "No, that's
Very
not
clever.
good." And then they'd argue over that. And then
Worry
they'd
about it.
argue, and finally they'd say, "Oh, that's good." And I'd say, "Really? Oh, okay, well, we'll go with that."
I like your impression of Gene.
Yeah.
Oh, really? No,
It's pretty good.
There you are.
Okay, well, we enjoyed a nice little break, and we left off talking about how the movie was developing along. Mark, let's go in and talk a little bit about what you did with some of the models when you came in. And we've heard about the model repair department. Can you explain to us a little bit about what went on in that area?
Well, I worked for Jim for about a year on the models. I remember clearly my first day on the job turned into an all-nighter. We were finishing the Klingon. And, so that was
Yeah,
my trial by
welcome.
fire. That was a good start.
Yeah.
I've had several of those just over the last week.
It never ends.
Never ends. And working for Jim, we all worked on all the models, but I sort of took the lead first on the little work bee. I think Tom Pocket started that, and I fabricated that, built that up, and got that basically finished. Then worked on the Space Office complex, did a lot of the preliminary, like pattern making and fabrication of that thing. Lee Edelman had already made the
Basic armature.
the armature and stuff. So then
And Russ Simpson.
Russ came in and started leading on the dry dock. And I left before the Star Trek completely went out the door. I mean, before the Enterprise went out the door.
Mhm.
And because, as you alluded to earlier, I really didn't understand the way the industry worked and the frustrating dynamics of that show, in particular the committee
Yeah.
process of design development. I was planning to leave the industry and work going into industrial design again, and but Able caught wind of the fact that I was leaving, and so they offered me a job over in the next stop on the model's progression.
Seward.
Yeah, so I went over there. They did make me an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I went over there and worked for a few months there until Abel's left the project. There it was a little shop. It was like a maintenance shop, and we
They
did.
repaired taxis there, didn't they, or something? Wasn't it a
At
taxi?
one point.
Yeah, the building initially was something like
Yeah,
that.
French knitting mills was the business that had more recently been displaced by the effects department for Star Trek under Bob Able. So we had a sort of a temporary wall structured area. There's a little model shop and then a paint area in there too. Rudimentary ventilation, nothing that would pass code nowadays.
Yeah.
So some of the lighting changes in the Enterprise took place there. We made an enlarged area of the Klingon for battle damage for that first sequence, one of the propulsion pods on the Klingon, and detailed that. We thought we did a really nice job detailing it, and then it got shipped to Apogee after Abel's left the project. And Pat McClung did yet another layer of detail on the layer of detail that we did on it, so it got it's incrementally up, and all in the pursuit of this crazy shot that John Dykstra dreamed up of pivoting over the bridge of the Klingon because it went towards camera. So we were looking at like 4 inches of model full screen at that point. So Pat McClung had to go into with tiny little chips of styrene to try to enhance the detail on that.
And I believe I saw something about he used internal pieces of the old tubes because they had such tiny, perfect detail.
Yeah, that was one source of parts that we used.
The old vacuum
metal
tubes
and
and
the
things,
antennas
yeah.
and stuff. There's some beautiful parts in there. I don't know if that stuff actually inspired the later use of acid etch, but I was sort of wandering off course here. But at Apogee, they also did a lot of acid etch brass work for the V'ger for that thing. And that was one inspiration for me to use that all for Blade Runner later.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
The original designs that we started on a V'ger at Abel's was going to do that for the surface, for all the multi-planing. We were literally going to cover the surface with a material that would change color by heat. And when the motion control camera went along, there was going to be a hot air blowing right in front that would literally make it change color in front of you as you went along
That's a cool idea.
through those layers. But there are a lot of things that we think up in this industry that don't happen. But the photo etching of metal really added a whole level of detail.
Yeah, it's really
Which
cool.
is something that's huge in the hobby these days.
Right.
Yeah.
Started off with a lot of your military scale ships, warships and things like that, and now it's gotten into everything. You can't hardly build a model kit anymore without some kind of photo etch add-ons for it.
Yeah.
Well, 3D printing is going to change, changing the world.
Right.
That's true.
It's going to change.
And between photo etching and 3D printing was laser cutting, and that was another level of precision. But so the Abel's shop was, it's not much bigger than the dining room space we're in here, right here. But when we went to Maxella, we had a smaller space, like a closet, about half the size of this space. And
How many people were working in there with you, Mark?
maybe 5 or 6 of us.
Yeah.
And that was really meant for maintenance. But as the whole spacewalk V'ger trip thing came into play, and Doug's ideas for that, Doug hired Greg Jean to set up another model unit for some of the crazy stuff in the V'ger mind meld with Spock, I guess it was.
Yes.
So we made the space lips and a few other larger shapes like that. But we were still tasked with more and more projects in this little model maintenance shop. We built the Beeger orifice. We did that view screen thing that I just showed you slides of there. Some other, I guess Greg Wilsbach was working for you at one time on the graphics in the
Yes.
bridge, and we made some view screens for him that were like half a third scale, so they could shoot them at Maxella because they didn't want to shoot them on the bridge. So we did some miniature, and then you mentioned the officer's lounge miniature earlier. We made that there, and so our closet sort of expanded out into the aisles of the company and the corridor of the company, and then out into the parking lot.
Yeah.
I remember one time sanding away on parts for the V'ger orifice or sphincter, whatever you want to call it. We called it the sphincter with that little rolling shape thing.
Yeah.
Lovely title.
I remember standing way out there, and Richard Yursich came racing in his Volvo and smashed into one of our parts and shattered the front lens on our thing. And everybody was in a terrific hurry on that movie all the time.
Yeah.
Jeff Katzenberg would roar in and out in his Porsche. And so Richard came in, and nobody even told him about it. I just glued his reflector back together again, put it back in his car. You know, we had all this great, crazy glue back then.
Yeah, hot stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, that stuff. So that was pretty much the way the experience was. We, it was pretty ad hoc, but we had all our own personal tools, and there was a machine shop there that we could get precision machine work done. And for some reason, there was a lathe out in the main access corridor that I turned that little pattern there for when the ship was damaged, and stuff like that. And we just used what we could find.
Tell us the interesting story you shared a little earlier about working on the miniature Enterprise with the lighting issues with that.
Oh, that was in Jim's shop. He has some pictures around here of the little 18-inch Enterprise. You call it the quarter scale one.
Yeah.
I just remember it's the 18-incher.
Yeah.
And one of my tasks there, it was really fun actually. I was doing the final assembly on that thing. And I was trying to jam a neon tube down inside the engineering section, the bottom fuselage. And the way I was doing it, it was very, very delicate. Miniature neon was really hard to work with. They're tiny little, like 7mm tubes back then.
I think some were even 4mm.
Oh yeah, 4mm. Larry Albright, I worked with him in several projects after that. He was just
Larry
a genius neon artist that
Yeah.
did all our precision neon work. I used him on Blade Runner a lot. And, he was just a fabulous person. And so he had done this thing. And so it was lit up. I had to jam it inside a hole down the middle of this engineering section. I had to do it lit so I could make sure that the light leaking was okay, because once I put it in there, it was going to be in there. So I wanted to make sure it was lit and working as I slipped it into place. But everything was so tight that I kept electrocuting myself with this thing. It just shocked. It just and everything was so tiny and delicate that I couldn't really react to it. I could only and then pull it out again and suck it up. And in like the course of an hour trying to get this thing together, I must have shocked myself 20 times.
Yeah, you were getting 4,000 volts, some milliamperage.
Later in my career, I was working on a set of commercials for Limelight. It's one of my favorite commercial jobs I ever did. It was Minute Maid Orange Soda. I don't know if you remember those spots. They're great. We made a miniature set per day for Dancing Oranges, and we were doing this Godzilla. We had done a cut foam costume Godzilla for a performer to wear, and a first perspective street. And I was recycling all this Blade Runner neon, and I literally electrocuted myself. I was putting the panel into place, and I was frozen and just locked. And if one of my other partners at 4 a.m. working on this thing trying to get it ready didn't unplug me, that would have been the end.
Yeah.
But,
I got knocked across the room on Close Encounters of the Mothership.
oh, I had a ton of neon.
It was grounded to the rail.
Oh,
I stepped on the rail. Yeah. Yeah, I bounced off the wall.
We can laugh now.
That doesn't happen digitally now.
Yeah.
No, right.
It's not
Takes
as
all the fun out
dangerous.
of it.
Right.
It's not as dangerous.
And Jim built the
It's only
mothership.
when it counts.
Yes, yeah. The big one that shows up at the end, right, Jim?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was an incredible model too. Now let's talk a little bit about the V'ger model itself for the film. We see in the film mostly interior shots of that model, and a lot of the fans wondered if there was ever a full scale or whatever scale complete exterior built that was ever intended to be shot. as we know, they've gone back now with the motion picture and the director's cut, and they've built a CGI model of the exterior as it's approaching Earth, so we finally, for the first time, kind of get to see a concept of what that was supposed to be. Was there any thought or work towards that in the original?
Well, originally for television, we built a V'ger that was about 12 to 14 feet long, but that was tossed out with those models, and we weren't involved in the model for the V'ger.
Well,
I can give you a little bit on that.
Yeah.
When Abels left the project, Doug Trumbull was hired to complete the job. He had 9 months, and at that time a staggering 350 shots or so to get done in that period of time. Now, of course, that happens all the time, but back then that was a huge amount of work. So we divvied up the work between his company, which was sort of an offspring of Future General, and was named Stoic, Star Trek Optical Industries Corporation. It's pretty funny. And Apogee, John Dykstra's company with his partners Apogee, which was sort of a descendant of ILM when they left Southern California to move to Northern California. So Apogee did the work on the V'ger exterior, and they did large panels of exterior shell with etched brass sheeting covering a lot of it. There's a very sort of a scaly look to it rather than a machine-like look. It looked more organic than that, to my eye. I don't know. But I never visited the shop when all the V'ger pieces were there. I don't believe there was ever a full exterior, but there were large pieces of it for camera overflight and stuff like that.
Well, one of my jobs as the art director at Abels was to design V'ger, and I did design a whole exterior thing. It was theoretically 20 miles long, and it unfolded in different ways, and there were a lot of different production design illustrations done, which have been documented in the Director's Edition Star Trek Starlog magazine. There's a whole interview with the stuff that we had done and we were developing, and it had a whole mod that opened up, and the Enterprise was going to, this was a living machine built upon the Voyager spacecraft crashing into a techno-mechanical living world that built this spaceship around it, trying to get it back home on this voyage. And on the way, I surmised that it went through a journey and it collected things along the way that were kind of buried around the altar of in the ship. In the end, you know, you finally have to get the Voyager spacecraft. So the whole thing was built around that, and some of the ideas probably rolled over. I know that somebody said Doug thought that my exterior design looked like a shrimp or something. And if you see all the illustrations we did, the whole thing was going to be interactive with the Enterprise, and it was more like a living machine. And you wouldn't ever really see the whole exterior shape. It was huge, 20 miles long. The Enterprise is this little flea going through this incredible machine. So the design of that evolved, and Sid Mead was critical to that. Sid Mead was brought in to do some conceptual illustrations of what the look would finally be. And then they used the same tricks that we all would have used, metal etching and whatever, and they, you know, ended up with what you saw.
Interesting. Now, we've talked a lot about the models, and I understand that through your company, Able, when you guys were all in there, you kind of got involved in a little bit more than what you signed up for in the beginning, getting involved in some of the sets, some of the other special effects that were going to be used on actors and things. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, well, the Able Studio did get involved in way more than it should. Bob Able himself, you know, was an incredible, dynamic person, and he kept getting us involved in more and more material. I was the art director and the guy in the line trying to actually get it done. So he'd set up these great deals with all this antagonism, and go get him, Richard. And I walk in the room like, yeah. So we were trying to do too much. Initially we weren't. Initially we were going to do just the miniatures and that photography, storyboard it, and a lot of the effects that could be done with techniques that had been involved in the Able Studio, graphic stuff and things. I mean, the Stargate quarter sequence, that's an effect that was finished at the Able Studios. And so anyway, we got involved in the sets initially where they had the interface with the models. And we were storyboarding it as well. So I had to sit there with the director and everybody and come up with a way of boarding it and telling the story. And we knew the possibilities more than anybody, and the art department at Paramount was these old school guys who just were really hard to move. They didn't want to do anything much different than what they'd already done.
Yeah.
So it was a real battle. And it finally got down to a sequence that the whole thing was, there's this little bit, this glowing thing that we had come up with that was finally, the whole feature was made of, it was like a flock of bees formed this glass, and then this energy goes and forms over here. And there were all these little bits, and Spock and Kirk go on this spacewalk, the mind meld wall or whatever it was called. And big physical sets were made, all this vacuum formed material, and the guys in these ridiculously designed spacesuits. I mean, I thought the design of those suits in that particular film were, compared to 2001 and Star Wars and stuff. Anyway, and they're supposed to get this thing, we've got this thing on it's got 3M material on it, and it's all trying to be done in camera, and it's insane. It looks horrible. You know, the physics of it all isn't working. And I think when we all saw those dailies, and I knew they were, I mean, I was going, who lit this? It was lit like a television show. Anyway, it just really wasn't working. And we were the ones who were in there saying, oh, well, you gotta make a curve, and it's gonna have me do this, here's the textures, and way too much stuff. And Paul Krause and some other people really did a phenomenal amount of work and job and design that could have worked given the time and money done the right way and all that. But yeah, we did more than we needed to.
And that led into some of the, like Mark mentioned, we went through several transitions of people being involved from the beginning. You wound up working for 3 different organizations throughout the production.
Yeah, I worked for Magicam first, then Robert Abel and Associates next, and then Star Trek Optical Industries Corporation third. Then I remember, I sort of, Jim and I might have been talking about this off camera, but my intro to Jim was through 2 of my classmates, Chris Ross and Tom Pock, both of whom Jim hired several months before me. And Chris Ross came back to visit us when I was still going to Art Center, saying, I'm designing intergalactic spaceships for a living. What are you guys doing? Well, that sounds a little better than toasters and clocks. Because I had worked as a model maker for General Electric Company for a year as an apprentice to learn the craft of industrial model making. So I actually was a pretty skilled model maker, but just kind of bored with what I was working on, and generally bored with industrial design office environments. So the ones I'd worked in were conservative and did a lot of boring work. It's just the nature of the business. There's a lot of meat and potatoes in any business, but I wasn't happy with what I was working on, so it really looked attractive to me. And then I also had a feeling, sort of a philosophical thing about doing work for industrial design, that you do bad product design work, it goes onto the shelves of Kmart's back then, or mass marketers, and it lives in the design environment, the visual environment, for years and years and years, and you can't get rid of it. And you work on a bad film and people don't see it, and it just disappears. That was 35 years ago. Nowadays, that's all wrong. That's no longer a good reason to have moved into film. So yeah, they're.
And so it evolved with different.
Yeah, so
groups.
My classmates and I, Chris and Tom, sort of having introduced me to Jim and gotten me involved in it in the first place. As the project kept metamorphosing, and we'd sort of see where each other was going. And I remember that moment when Bob Abel himself announced to the whole team in the Seward Street building that we were closing down, and that he'd do the best to take care of all the crew. And the crew sort of like divided up. Some went to Apogee, some went to Marina Del Rey. And I felt like, and my two friends, you know, Tom and Chris, ended up at Apogee, and I thought, geez, I wonder if I made the right choice. And but it turned out to just be sort of a turning point in my career to end up at Maxella.
Okay. Now, when we talked about the models a little bit, now people tend to assume that as a model maker that you pick out a particular model, or if there's going to be multiple models that are going to be built, that you'll just build that model and that's just you. But isn't it true that the model will be handled by several different people, and there'll be different, I don't know if you want to call them specialists, or if there's particular, or is it just based on workload that you just say, well, I'm busy with this today, and this other guy can come in and work on this part of it today? And
Well, everybody has their strengths. And everybody on my team, it was an incredible team. But they all have their strengths, and it's a matter of, you can see, and from my point of view, I could see where things were going and who would be best for that project. And then augmenting the team with somebody to do something really special like the paint, and hiring Paul to come in and do that. So it's not as though you pick one piece and like, Mark, you're going to build the ship, and it just doesn't happen that way.
It's a group effort.
It's a team effort, and because one day you'd be working on the Enterprise, maybe the Klingon is shoved ahead because they're going to start shooting with the Klingon, so then everybody jumps on the Klingon. It's just,
Part of the great thing about working in the visual effects industry back then was all the great people that you meet and work with.
And still remain friends with.
Yeah.
Well,
And
we were
they come
really-
from such diverse backgrounds. I mean, we'd have special forces guys that were really good with pyrotechnics and
Oh,
stuff
sure,
like that.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I
We
can
know how to
wire
blow
that up for you in
stuff
no
up,
time,
What was the guy from Mattel that we hired for a while? His name, Ron something. I came in and he was loading shotgun shells, and
oh yeah.
I said, no, that can't happen here.
It was more rock and roll in those
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And people had a lot of talent that came together in certain ways for.
Sculptors, artists, painters,
Yeah.
pattern makers,
Yeah.
machinists. We had such a variety of
Electricians.
backgrounds.
Yeah. In
We
fact,
had
didn't you?
Paul, a really interesting sidelight is Paul Turner, who was much older than the rest of us, and he had come from aerospace, and I hired him as an electrician, and so he did most of the wiring and figuring out what the electrical system needs were for us. And after we closed Magicam down, he went back to aerospace, and he ended up being the lead cockpit guy on the space shuttle.
Really?
Yeah, he wired the space shuttles, and he's one of the reasons that Paul Turner.
Some sharp people, yeah.
Yeah.
Multi-talented, and then you'd think in working in that kind of an environment then, and if you've done it for several years, you'd be more well-rounded as an artist. You're doing different things. You're not just going to specialize in one
Oh, yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Right.
part of that is that we were doing things by hand. Okay, right now, almost everything we're doing is created being done on a screen and pads, and physical things are even being made by machines and stuff. So making real models, touching things, and what you learn by physically doing something with your hands, making a model versus seeing it on a screen, the tactile nature of the way we all work made people work together on something. He's next to me spraying, and if you got that, where's the masking and
Yeah.
And the
that
fact that you were
interaction.
working on something tangible, that you could all stand around and crip.
Yeah,
You could
yeah,
stand
exactly.
around and say,
Exactly.
this is what it needs. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly.
But the upside of the digital world is we no longer have to breathe the fumes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And I have these because of all the times that Tom Pock would drop an aluminum pipe behind me when I was working on something
Oh,
else.
my God.
I have tinnitus from those days too. It's constant ringing, and
Yeah.
I attribute it
Table
to
saw.
pushing aluminum sheet through a table saw.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
I credited it
Destroys
to
the-
listening to rock and roll too loud.
You didn't tend to stop and think about what that was. You just were just trying to get it done.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
sure, yeah.
Exactly. The project becomes way too important.
Well, the physicality of doing things with your hands. When you type something down, do you remember it as much as if you physically write it in a book? And so then, that's something that's kind of escaping from the world right now, and people need to slow down and actually do things with your hands and, you know, learn to play music and take
talk
real
to each other.
pictures and talk to each other and look at the world around you with your own eyes and look how it works and what needs to be done.
When I mentor kids, and this is just a holdover from my education, it's always been my feeling that the first thing a person needs to do, if you have any ideas and you want to express those ideas, is you need to learn to draw. And so when I mentor kids, the first thing I do is I lean on, do you know how to draw? You know, do you like to draw? And then we go from there. And I really think that that's being lost. I don't think they're teaching drawing.
Do you,
Well, I'm not sure how long people are going to
do
be
you
able to
guys find that
handwrite.
that's a common
That's-
denominator in all of your interests early on? That you all were into some kind of drawing or visualizing objects and kind of focused on details?
Yeah, I think so.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was an Air Force officer, and my mother was an artist. And I loved airplanes, and I was around them all. And I loved making models, and then started making some that flew. And yeah, my mother influenced me with art, and I learned to play the accordion and do ballet and things. And it was like, because there was those influences coming in, but making
Excuse
things
me,
with your
say that
hands-
again? Do ballet?
Yeah, I did do ballet.
Ah,
Can you show us some?
I can
Yeah,
do a tour shit.
tippy
You
toes.
don't want to see it.
Tippy Toes Taylor.
That's not a bad thing. The tough guy wide receivers in the NFL learn ballet to improve their game.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's
right.
nothing wrong with that.
That's how my mother convinced my dad
Mhm.
to let me take ballet. She showed him an article where Bear Bryant had some of these big linemen take some dance classes.
Whatever you say, Richard, that's okay.
Anyway,
I believe you.
we were talking about
I think it's
doing
awesome.
things by hand, you know, whether is
Yeah.
handwriting going to
Yeah.
evolve out, but we all think that you should do things with your hands and make models and get a craft and you learn to play an instrument.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Pretty funny.
Okay, so we're fairly along in the production of the movie now. We've got the models built, we've got things going. What are some of the big problems that you ran into that you weren't expecting? Now, I've heard the story about the air conditioning system dropping water from a leaky vent or something on the roof. The Enterprise happened to be parked in a spot one day and we had a bad problem with that. Talk to us about what happened there.
Yeah, that was over a weekend. I can't remember why we had a weekend. The Enterprise was up on its armature mount, on its model mover on stage, ready for a shot when we went away for the weekend. And it unfortunately was positioned right under an air conditioning system on the roof. And a slow leak happened. It was hot. A leak came down from the air conditioner all weekend and dripped on the top of the model. And it was on a part that had been redesigned during one of these processes, I think, at Abel's, and believe it or not, made out of wood. It warped the wood, separated it from the top of the saucer, and
Took the paint with it.
Pulled paint.
Oh, yeah,
and,
pulled the
oh
paint
yeah,
with it,
what a
and
nightmare.
it was totally unusable, and it had worked so badly that there's no way we could have repaired that part. So, for me, that was
Having hold
a
that.
36. It was a 36-hour work day, a 4-hour rest across the street at the Marriott Hotel in a room that production had rented permanently just for that kind of thing. And so I made this up over 36 hours, and then rested for 4, and then came back and finished it, made the mold on it, and cast the part. And this is a second cast of the part. I, of course, used the better of the castings for the real deal. And tag teamed it with our electronics guy, Chris Gregg, at that time, and with our painter, Ron Gress. to get it fitted to the top of the saucer again and
And
repaired,
seamlessly,
yeah.
All right.
And the problem was it was all being set up for a close-up on the bridge.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
that shot that went right into the bridge, you know, so. It was kind of, in a way, it was kind of fortuitous because the detail on this part here was much finer and more precise than the detail on the part that it replaced, so. In that sense, it was good. All the
Awesome.
things that we learned in the first
It all
times around.
worked out.
Story.
Yeah.
Any other issues or big
that was
setbacks
one
that you guys had?
That was one of two super long shifts on the thing. The V'ger mind melt was the last project to be finished, at least in the model shop. And we were making lots of different parts at different times. So we had the sphincter model I talked about before. It was about 8 feet, 10 feet in diameter or so. We built it in the aisles and stuff. And there was one 60-hour shift where we were just mindlessly stuffing fiber optics into that thing, all to bundle up. And then we realized that the parts were so green, they were so uncured that the casting, or the foam resin that the parts were cast from was melting the fiber optics, and melting the coatings off the surface of the fiber optic, plastic fiber optic rods, which stopped them from working. You know, the light wouldn't bounce through them anymore without that coating on the surface. So we had to redo it, and that all was like 60 hours. And I was hallucinating by the end of it, and not from anything I was taking, just from
Yeah,
straight fatigue.
yeah.
We're up to the point now where we're getting close to the end of the film, and do you guys, when you're getting to that point in the film, are you looking forward to the end, or are you starting to have a little bit of trepidation about breaking up the team and maybe worrying about what your next project might be, or is it typical when you're on something like that by the time you reach the end that you've already got your next work lined up? Or
There is no typical.
no typical.
To me, that's a defining characteristic of crew. When I was running my own shops, there were the guys that would start calling around about 2 months out, and they were usually the guys with young families, mortgages, and they had lives that required cash flow. And there are other people, and there first. And there are other people that just were young and single and project focused, and they were just much more interested in the completion and the closure than they were in finding the next thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, our situation on, specific to Star Trek was there were so many things happening around us that it's just kind of the door closed. And that's what these things here are. Giant semi-truck and trailers showed up, and we loaded up the dry dock and loaded up the Enterprise, and they went off to the next step because we were absorbed and shut down, and it's kind of and then getting away from Star Trek, productions are kind of like rapid ramp up, and you don't have time to think, and then there's a cliff and a garage sale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's no bell curve
That's what it
to it.
is.
There's no bell
Just
curve. And I learned that about crewing shows too. You don't bell curve off. The producer might think, well, can't you start losing people towards the end? No. You can't. It's a crisis all the way up to the last second. So
not
you
even
ramp
on the
up your
second.
crew, and you keep them to the last, and then you just cut it end.
There's a cliff and a garage sale.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I've garage saled so many companies. The decade of the 70s, I garage saled Future General a couple of times, and it's unbelievable.
Mhm.
See, we all have tattoos that say that right here.
Garage sale.
Right, so.
So at the end of Star Trek, was there any thought about possibly revisiting Star Trek, or if was there a thought in your mind about? I guess the simplest way to say it is that you've done your jobs and you look at it as you did the best you could, and you're not. How much concern do you have about the overall success of the film? I mean, besides showcasing your work, to influence possibly returning back to that at a later date, or if you move beyond that, like I said, immediately when like Jim says, after you walk out the door, is it?
You move on to the next project.
And nobody thought
Whatever it is.
there was going to be another Star Trek.
No.
It was a one-off.
Mhm.
And that's what we all thought at the time.
Yeah. No, there was.
Well, I thought what it did that was important was we set a particular kind of design level, the typeface that we designed. My art group at Abel's designed the typeface, the Klingon typeface, all the logos, the lettering, all the graphics everywhere. And that's remained as, you know.
The standard of the
that was-
franchise.
And that was a custom typeface that we designed, and the Klingon typeface. So all those kind of little details still hang in there as little touches that are in there as far as the craftsmanship and the work that we did with those tools at that time. You know, it rocked pretty good.
Richard, can you read Klingon?
Speak it, speak it or sing it.
Keeping
Yeah.
your voice a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, there you go.
Yeah, it has to be a lot of that.
Yeah,
Now we
Gene
got it.
Roddenberry.
Yeah.
I think the baseline is that we all approach everything we do as we're going to give it everything, and it's going to be the best there ever was, and that's how I feel about what we did. And
Well, that's what you do as a creative person. I mean, you whatever you do, you
You throw
give it
yourself
everything.
100%
Otherwise,
into it,
otherwise
110%.
you're not.
Yeah.
and,
Well,
yeah. Otherwise,
As a
go
creative person, you don't get to retire really.
Right.
No.
home. No.
Like, God,
No.
that's it. That's no more ideas.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking up anything else.
Yeah.
That tends to build on itself, doesn't it, with people in the team, that when they see someone doing that, that kind of just spreads and everybody just gets that attitude.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the chaff falls away rapidly.
Mhm.
And if you can't, keep up with the race, if you can't keep up, then
Mhm.
find something else to do.
Right, yeah.
I can really safely say that the crew that I put together there, there was no chaff. We didn't. Well, wait a minute.
The shotgun.
I don't remember his name, but the guy that mixed 50-50 foam with his hands in a 5-gallon bowl.
Oh, boy.
I don't remember
Yeah,
that.
he disappeared. He was only there for about a week.
That's dangerous. I would say that my answer to that question would be that. It's so crazy. My answer to that is that filmmaking is above all a collaboration, and it's a collaboration that everybody has to work together. Everybody puts everything they have into it. It works best when there's one person at the top, which was your problem with the design of Star Trek.
Yeah.
It works much better when you have a director that is directing the film and directing the effort, rather than an executive
Yes.
producer and a director sort of hired on. One model's a TV model, one model's a film model, but if you've got one person identified as the creative key, and the whole project's going to at least rise to that level, then we'll go smoothly. But everybody along the way has to give it their all. They just do.
And you're always reinventing the wheel. I mean, there are always problems that
Right.
come up that you cannot anticipate, and you have to come up with unique solutions that
Especially if
maybe
they
have never
change
been
the
done
script
before.
every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as a
Yeah.
director, which, I am, it's how you think on your feet. And you can be incredibly dogmatic, that I have this shot I wanted to do with those earphones there in that position perfectly, but the light changed and all these things, dynamics are going around. And you can be, no, damn it, I want it this way. Start forcing this thing. Or you could say, okay, I get it, well, I'm gonna move the camera here, this flag that, make a cross here, do that. And bammo, you got the shot and you move on because you're adapting to what's going on and you know the overall picture. And that's what Mark's saying, you really need leadership in all the departments and
Right.
and the director for sure.
What would you say was the most fondest memory that you would have from working on that film?
People you meet, probably.
Just the overall experience
The
of it?
people
or-
you meet and work with, I
Yeah.
think.
Mhm.
Building the enterprise,
I think the
pretty cool.
radio-controlled car races that we had in the parking lot across the street.
Yeah.
Remember
Who's
that?
that illustrator, that guy that did the cutaway illustrations? And
Yes.
man, he-
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, he was
Um,
insanely good with those.
yeah.
yeah. What was his
He
name?
chased them around
Dave,
the traffic
was it
and
Dave
stuff.
something?
No.
Yeah.
Big guy.
Yes.
Yeah,
big
yeah, he
guy.
had a studio out in Burbank, I think
Yeah.
it was.
He had
Yeah.
an 8-scale gas-powered
Yeah.
RC car that was
Yeah.
like the twice as fast as anything anybody else had.
I
We-
was out
we
at his
built- we
place
went
and
out
he would
and-
drive them down through traffic and come around, you know, he was.
What a great thing to film.
There was a big parking lot across the street that was generally empty, and we bought 8th scale radio-controlled cars and built them on our own time in the shop. And
Must have been on our own time.
yeah, I don't know how it started, but all of a sudden everybody in the shop had one, and we would adjourn at lunch and go over to the parking lot, and we had a track laid out, and we'd have a ball with those things. And then he showed up with his gas-powered
Wow.
Yeah.
80 mile an hour thing.
This is an illustrator who did, for all the major car companies like Honda, Toyota, Chevrolet, whatever, he did these intricate cutaway drawings of engines and transmissions so that you could look inside and see. And they were spectacular, and they were all airbrushed.
Yeah.
You know, he would do it, he would outline it all in pen and ink and everything, and then airbrush it, and they
Yeah,
were
so he did one
scary.
of those of the Enterprise
Yeah.
while we were working on the movie. Actually, he started working on that.
Excellent. Now, I've had conversations with some of the people that were involved with some of the later versions of Star Trek. Next Generation, some of the later movies. There's a fellow out there by the name of Doug Drexler. I don't know if you guys know or have heard of
I know
him.
his name.
He refers to your group as the godfathers of Star Trek, and that you guys should be not made to feel
Should be
old
shot.
with that term, but meant as a term of honor, that you pretty much set the standard for every film since Star Trek, the motion picture, and that all the films have tried to aspire to that level as far as the level of technical and problem solving that you guys, and there's a lot of consensus out there with the fans that the Enterprise itself was never again filmed so beautifully, and the model itself that you built, Jim, and all of you have worked on, there's never been a miniature in any film that was so perfect that you could go right up to it and get right on top of it and see it on a 60-foot screen and just say it's real. It's a real ship. It's 1,000 feet long and it flies by, and
It was a beautiful model. It really was. It
That's
was a
all we
beautiful-
wanted.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's
So
all
would
we
you guys
wanted.
agree
That's
with
all
that?
we
I
wanted.
mean, having
I-
seen the model and worked
Yeah.
on the model and comparing it with other
We're prejudiced,
miniatures
but yeah.
that you've worked on,
Yes,
how it
but I would
compares?
say one thing that I want to be very complimentary here is that, you know, I was involved in designing it and helping get it to a particular point before it rolled on its way. And the way it was lit and shot, and what Trumbull did and that whole team over there, the way it was lit, the miniatures and stuff, it was beautifully done. So they did pull the shots off really, and the lighting was really terrific.
I thought went into that lighting. You know,
Yeah,
between
the little-
well, the
Stewart
little
and
fiber
Virgil
optic
Morano and the dental mirrors.
Dental mirrors and
Yeah, the
fiber
dental mirrors
optics
was
and
great.
stuff,
Yeah,
hitting little, you know, just hitting little
Yeah.
details here and there.
yeah.
Mhm,
I think that's what gave it scale. It was really well shot.
Yeah.
mhm.
But they couldn't, Doug said to me straight away when it was all revealed and we all walked in and they lit it. You know, he said, Paul, you know, it looks stunning, but we just, you know, we're gonna have to light it low. We can't light it real hot because we'll get light kicks off the edge and the mats, they couldn't pull clean mats. So nobody has ever, other than the people who were there, who worked on it, who shot it, nobody's ever seen how truly beautiful it was. And that now it's been ruined. But it was really, I mean, I was jaw dropped when I saw it because I'd been working, you know, we'd all been working on it in fluorescent lighting in the model shop. It wasn't dramatically lit, and boy, when it was in the dry dock
Yeah.
and
Were
lit,
you all there at the same time or about the same time when they did that first lighting session with the professionals lighting the model and
It
getting
wasn't
the-
one session, it was a
was-
developmental process. They'd
Uh-huh.
roll it out and we'd be working on it, so they'd roll back in and out,
Yeah.
and they'd do tests on it. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
No,
They're lighting
that's
testing.
luxury.
There's a hero shot
There is no
actually of the,
luxury.
Yeah.
there's kind of a hero shot angle of it in the dry dock that Virgil Morano shot like 8x10s of and everything. I think that was probably, when they had it
Yeah.
bid for that angle, that,
And I'd love to get hold of some of those 8x10s. I've been trying to get hold of Virgil, and I haven't had no luck. You see him once in a while, don't you?
Once in a while, he's involved with the Visual Effects Society, so
Yeah.
Oh,
he comes around, and see him usually at least once a year.
right.
he's at most of those events.
Yeah.
So you've all gone on to have very distinguished careers and are continuing in the movie businesses. And you've seen these changes take place since the time of the motion picture. And looking back on that now, do you have any sense of which one do you, it's, I don't want to say it in a bad way, but which one do you feel really truly captures the essence of movie making, the digital age or what was done, say, at the time of the motion picture?
Who wants to answer?
I'll
that?
go first. I think digital visual effects, all the tools that are part of the digital tool set are much better tools. And it's much easier to do visual effects on a high quality level with the tool set we have now than it was then. How that tool is used is a different story.
Yeah.
But
It's a
that
new
comes
paint-
down to creative
A
individuals.
new paintbrush.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the hand behind the brush.
But it's still a much better tool set. Some of the things that we've talked about, even about the old enterprise model, from Paul's point of view, as soon as ILM got a hold of that model, it was ruined. But that was a function of process, not creative choice. Doug took the time to front light, backlight, all this matte work on the thing, whereas ILM's process was dictated by blue screen. So they could not put a glossy model in front of their blue screen to get any kind of matte.
Especially black.
And-
Well, they get all kinds of dropout because whatever screen color they use,
So they-
there was that color somewhere in the model.
Yeah.
So they had no choice but to matte it. To matte the finish on the thing, so they could do their traveling matte work in a way that fit their process. Doug also shot on 65 millimeter film, which was at that time the largest film stock people were using for visual effects. And I'll tell you, seeing dailies of that ship printed from the original negative, like the day after, oh my God, it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it really was.
We were,
So I think that there are still times when miniatures are good tools and good, great way to do work that way. But for the most part, being able to composite digitally is essential, and to enhance shots digitally, even if they begin as miniatures, is still almost universally going to give you a better product than the old tools in the old way.
Well, you all were incredibly talented artists, and there's a lot you could do with the motion picture, but I think, isn't it true with digital that I think we were talking about this earlier, Richard, you can literally create anything
Yeah.
yes.
that an artist
There's
or
nothing
somebody, a
that you can
storyteller
imagine that we can't
can
create.
imagine. Mhm.
If it's the media it's going to eventually play in, is it in 3D, is it a theater, is some new form of entertainment? But it's total media land that we're in, so the mixture of whatever it takes to do the thing well, and the mixture of models with the digital thing's not going away. That is what we do, and it's
Yeah.
only going to get more and more pervasive. So the complexity of imagery around us now, it's really dense everywhere. So it's like a paintbrush, and it's how you play it, and
Yeah.
it's a mixture. So you were asking initially the old era of models and that versus doing it digitally. That's like trying to be, draw a line in the sand, which has never existed really.
Mhm.
As a working visual effects supervisor, I still will look at some project and think, oh, that'd be a cool miniature project. Let's see what this looks like. And as soon as you budget it out and you realize how much time it takes to build it properly and then
Yeah.
shoot it, and actually the process of shooting it is expensive too.
Right.
Whereas if you're if you approach that same, say it's the Enterprise, and you approach that same thing digitally, you've got a couple of guys modeling it and texturing it, and then you start animating it, and then you start lighting it, and those are all things that happen in a very contained environment. Basically, people at workstations, and it comes down to the quality of the people doing it. But
Right.
the process is much faster and cheaper. It's just cheaper because you don't need a whole crew working to light each individual shot like that.
All right.
And the director's cut, that's a CG Enterprise, you know, all the other shots and stuff, so. They've built
It's-
that.
The example for it, for me as a fan, just using the motion picture again as an example, owning both versions of the movie myself, the Blu-ray of the original, and then now they haven't made a Blu-ray of the director's cut, and I think it had something to do with the way it was shot. They couldn't do it, the resolution or something didn't match up. But the director's cut, as you know, all the shots, exterior shots of the Enterprise are all done CGI. It's not the model
That's
anymore.
what I said.
And I mean, when we look at that, me anyways, I don't think it looks as good. It doesn't have the rich texture to it. It doesn't have the illusion of scale as much. It doesn't seem like where the thing just looks really
Well, you have to think
big.
about the budget of the director's cut refinish and how much time they had to spend on doing that work versus how much time was spent on the original.
Or to,
Some-
well, I'm sorry.
You,
To dig up that model and relight it and
Yeah.
do all the work that would
Have
take
to be
would be,
refinished.
no way.
Right.
Which we'll talk about at the end of this.
Right.
it- I think that for me, I still bring value to teams working digitally with tools I have no idea how to use because of my experiences and because of the experiences that I can put in front of other people and say, look how this was lit, look how light affected this object. Or let's go out in the parking lot and I'll show you what depth of focus should look like. And take people through the exercises like that just based on my experiences. So that is, still has a lot of value in a visual effects team, especially with artists that are young, that have been trained on digital media and are expert at using the tools, but just maybe don't have the same life experiences that certainly we had under our belts at this point.
Right.
As one godfather to another.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Again, that was said in an extremely complimentary way, from the standpoint of laying the groundwork and being the standard bearer, and everyone's tried to maintain the level of dedication and quality that you guys did in that project throughout, and it's the finest example of all the Trek films as far as photography and miniature work, and that's saying a lot because they've put a lot into each one of these. And I mean, the two newest films are action-packed for sure, but they just don't have that. There's just something that's not quite there that's quite the same. Anyways, for long time Trek fans that have been following the franchise for quite a while, we appreciate that they're keeping it alive, but there's just something a little different about it now, where there isn't so much focus on character as there is the action and things like that.
Well, their shots are much, I mean, the speed of the way films are shot and edited
Yeah.
today, it's like everybody's got a nervous
Unbelievable.
system like a hummingbird.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
because of the media that everybody's being surrounded, then they are faster.
Mhm.
So that film, it takes a lot more time, there's a lot more grandeur to that whole intro to
Mhm.
the Enterprise, and the scales and things are, because they aren't pushing the shot so fast now.
Now, we're 30 years on into that, and I know all of you have not had the experience, but Paul has actually attended one of the big Star Trek conventions and had a chance to be up front and see what the fans think about you guys. Have you guys ever thought of that? And what do you think about the fans or what would you like fans to think of as far as your legacy of seeing your work up on the screen? And even though it's not being shown in theaters anymore, millions of people every day are probably watching the movie. And what do you think about that when you think about what you'd like them to remember about your work, and where you see yourselves continuing in your career beyond what you've already accomplished?
In the next 30 years.
Well, that'll take about 30 years.
Speak for yourself.
To play out, right?
I think you said it all when your comment, which I appreciate very much, about what we accomplished. And for me, that's it. That's all the reward I need, is someone to say that. Hearing that is music, and to me, that's what we did it for.
Well, you asked earlier what it is that we liked about it. I mean, I thought it was an honor to design that icon. I had been making imagery for television and other things, but to finally work on a first feature film and it be to, create this kind of iconic spacecraft, it was an honor, and everybody that threw in on that really did a beautiful job, and everybody says she was beautiful, and that's the truth. And your description of walking in and seeing it lit, I never got that opportunity. But anyway, that's what was really great. Creating that icon and hoping that people would love it now.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, there are fans that they go to a movie like that and just look at it and look at the story and say, okay, it's Star Trek, and they get into the fiction side of the story and everything. Now, growing up as a kid and loving models and loving working with my hands and creating, and whenever I would see any kind of movies, now some of the original movies I can remember were some of the old Ray Harryhausen films, which were my favorite. The original Jason and the Argonauts, the Sinbad films, where there was this incredible work and detail that he was doing. And I think I read in his book, he estimated that he spent over a third of his entire lifetime clicking and taking pictures.
Yeah.
The amount of time it took in his body of work. And so as a I'm trying to think how old I was, either probably 13 or 14 years old when I walked into the theater on the debut of the film that came out December 7th. I remember that date of the motion picture. Seeing the ship coming out of the dry dock and everything, when Kirk and Scotty do the tour, I wasn't into the film or the story or anything. I was wondering about who the guys were that created it, because it was just absolutely, it was better than Star Wars. I mean, I saw Star Wars too, and in Star Wars I could see for lack of a better term, I could see the fake stuff on some of the models. The boxes around some of them, and some of the detail work that if there's a famous scene where one X-Wing flies by and one of the engines is not working, it's not, the light's out or whatever. And you guys just didn't let any of that kind of stuff happen in that film. And
There's some pretty hefty matte lines in that movie.
Yeah.
And then Star Trek motion picture too.
Yeah.
If you watch Star Wars now, it's hard.
Yeah.
But the Enterprise, when they did the fly around and everything, and like I said,
It's one of the all-time gorgeous shots,
Yeah.
sequences.
of all time of any kind of film of that nature, so that's something really to be proud of. And we've Paul and I have talked about this, and I guess we'll open it up to the segue here. The model today is in very poor condition, and there's sort of no one really knows who has the thing right now. We're kind of trying to figure it out, and again, with the support of the fans, we're kind of all pushing to have that model. We'd like to see it restored and brought back to the way it was when it was painted by Paul and you guys had it fresh and ready to go for. It's never been that beautiful before or since, and now it's in extremely poor condition. And from what I understand about the materials that it's made out of and everything, that it will just continue to deteriorate. It's not going to be something that the armature.
It has been
the armature will
mishandled.
probably hold up forever, right? But the
It's the armature's bulletproof. The skins should be fine.
They just been badly treated. They've been mishandled. You see how the thing was handled at
you
Christie's.
can't pick it up by the body, right? You got it.
People were trundling it around on.
You never picked up by the body.
Yeah,
No,
I
it was-
don't know if it still has the rolling stand that it lived on, but that's the only way it can
And
be.
the little, what do we call those sticks that we jam into the
Yeah,
armature
right.
slots to
Yeah,
lift
it's
it
the
up
only way you
like a
could-
litter?
That's
You
the
know,
only way you can lift it.
Heavy.
Only
It
way
was
you can
heavy.
deal with it. And the only thing is that the finishes were all lacquer, and it's on a number of different kinds of plastics, and lacquer just isn't stable. as the plastic expands and contracts, the lacquer is going to crack. And so what needs to happen if it's going to be restored to its pristine beauty is that all the paint has to come off of it.
Mhm.
And it needs to be stripped.
Mhm.
You'd find a lot of sins if you did that.
Pardon?
Yeah.
You'd find a lot of sins
Oh,
if you
yeah,
did that.
yeah, but
You know, a lot of changes too over there.
I guess
That'd be really
yeah,
interesting.
The
to just
question is
go down there by
how
there.
much of what is there can remain there that was from the original.
Not
Yeah,
much from the
because
pictures I've
the
seen.
collector, whoever's gonna say, no, I don't
Yeah,
want you
yeah,
etching it
that's
because
the other thing.
that's what it is, it's evolved to this.
well, and it is the history. It's the patina that you know. So that is a huge question because by removing that patina, removing that finish, do you destroy the value of it?
Because you're saying, this is a piece of art, and
Yeah.
this is what it is.
I've
this is what
discussed that.
It's evolved to.
I've
Yeah,
discussed
but
that
then-
with Paul, and I've discussed it with a lot of the people out there that are kind of the feeling that like, okay, like, and Paul kind of explained it in a certain way. If you had an old Duesenberg, which is one of the most valuable American
It's
vehicles.
much more valuable if it's got a patina.
Yeah, but if you have just any Joe Schmo restore the car, there's something different. But when you have, if you have the original, if you were going to commit to restoring,
Right.
if you had the original Duesenberg people that built the
Right.
car,
That's
available
the
to
only,
That's
the
a different
restoration.
thing.
that's
because
the only way.
That's
they
a
have the
different
provenance.
thing.
So nobody, whoever owns it, and we'll get to that, but if we restore it,
Well, you're the
it'll
only
have-
people that could possibly
the
be
value
considered.
will be horrendously increased.
Mhm.
And then if it's used in the film, even more so. I mean, it'll be a priceless object. But, and I think as popular, an American popular culture icon, or as important a
World
pop culture icon as
World
Marilyn
icon,
Monroe.
yeah.
And if we restore it, that's a whole, because we have the provenance, and it'll have our fingerprints all over it figuratively, then that adds value. If anybody else was to touch it, that would just be a sin. Better to leave it as it is. But being that we're still around and we want to restore it, then it should be restored by us.
I see, well, why not just build a brand new one on the old armature? If that's what we're gonna do. See,
You
it
know.
has to do with how much of what's there you keep, because that's the value of it. If you're a collector, I didn't buy something to have it
You,
totally.
Problem
it's all
is you-
speculation without seeing the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
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 You have to
How much shrink
reserve.
back is there in the vacuum form parts?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's
Do-
good to
How much
really
of the
restore
electrical
it.
circuits need to be replaced?
Right. Probably all.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And up
To be updated to where,
Upgraded, yeah.
it would have to be updated to where you can't worry about only having it on for 5 minutes and stuff starts to
Exactly.
overheat and all
No.
that, yeah. There's
No,
much
it's
more.
You
modern
just go down to
lighting.
the armature and keep one little strip of it like the Indy 500.
Yeah,
The
Brick.
brickyard,
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
part that's in there that's sacred and.
I'm sure there's a reasonable part of it though that's fine. You know, that can be touched up or whatever. But the
Yeah.
paint, probably we wouldn't use lacquer this time. I mean,
No.
their paint has evolved.
Oh, yeah.
And the airbrush paints they have now for customizing cars and helmets and everything they're wonderful. They go
Whole
down
new-
beautifully and
Paint
they,
is a whole new world.
yeah.
You know, I mentioned to Jim earlier on, before we off camera, that there's a gentleman out there that actually owns the dry dock and has completely restored it to brand new
Have you
pristine
seen it?
condition. They
I'd love to see it.
they cut it in half during the production of Next Generation because the Enterprise D model they were using was only a 4-footer, so this thing was cut in half. But luckily enough, they didn't throw away the other half, and they've reunited it and restored it. There's some beautiful videos and pictures of it all over the internet.
Huh.
It was a beautiful model.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the detail and everything, and they get up close and you look at those, the lighting fixtures that are in it,
Yeah,
and
uh-huh.
the graphics that are there that you would think, well, they even put the little numbers that mean all this stuff and everything on there. And you can't see that generally in the film,
Right.
it just passes by.
I tell you about all those numbers and things. All those were our girlfriends' names,
Uh-huh.
birth dates, our children, everybody
Oh, now
contributed to
you,
that.
yeah, now you're
Every single.
destroying the Star Trek guy's dream because they're thinking all this means everything and it's got
Well, it
something
does,
to
it does, it's
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
Yeah,
all of our
Build
children,
their signatures.
friends,
but,
family.
I love the work bee. That was a great little model.
yeah.
Yeah.
Boyd, about Mark's
Yes.
journey.
Yeah. So Mark, would you care to explain a little bit and go on a little bit more detail about how your career continued after Star Trek, leading up to these
Those babies.
big
Well,
guys over here?
I mentioned that, that going down to, ending up at Maxella really sort of became the turning point of my career. And under the wing at Maxella of Greg Jean, who was the chief model maker and worked for Doug Trumbull after Jim did on Close Encounters, yeah, and then when he sort of expanded the model shop at Maxella on Star Trek, Greg opened a separate little shop to do a lot of the Meet Your Mind meld trip models. So Greg hired me on a couple projects after that, and then little stuff like the Firefox pattern, things like that. And then I was working on Close Encounters Special Edition, did some work on that for Greg. And then Greg got tied up on One from the Heart, which became much bigger and went much longer than he originally
Yeah.
expected. When Doug called,
Yeah, he was down the street, and, yeah.
yeah, when Doug called Greg to set up the model shop on Blade Runner, Greg said he couldn't do it, but he recommended me, and that just, that movie really made my career. So I stayed with Doug and through Blade Runner and Brainstorm, and did on Brainstorm built more things which were mostly action props, not so many miniatures in that project, but all the laboratory machines were all built in my shop, and we just put out so much stuff for that movie. It was amazing, and a real sort of a life lesson to me about how much you put in emotionally into a project. And Natalie Wood died, and the whole movie changed, and it's all stuff that happens that's out of your control. And in this big giant collaboration that requires luck as much as skill and dedication, it's a tough project. But after that, Doug, moved into ShowScan. I stayed with him for some of those projects, and then sold the business to Richard Edlund, and it became Boss Film Corporation. I stayed through the first 5 years of Boss Film, and it just really sort of made my career in miniature effects. Then I've had my own company in miniature effects for about 6 years after that, and just had a great run, did great projects. I had a great partner, Bob Spurlock, and
Yeah, I did work with those guys.
yeah, we did some commercials together. It's really fun. I remember that dance marathon one for Duracell. That was so fun. We built these puppets, and Richard animated them himself on the stage. It was so fun puppeteering that stuff. At the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel location.
Yeah.
It was really fantastic.
Go on, when you went on, did the Fifth Element and...
Yeah, so when I left Boss Film to form Stetson Visual with Bob Spurlock, I felt like I was at a crossroads then, and I felt like I wasn't really quite ready to go into visual effects supervision, but I knew that's where I wanted to go. And Leslie and I had our first child, and we were trying to have a second, and just I knew I could continue to make money in miniature effects at that time. So I decided to go that way, but we designed a short-term business so that Bob could fulfill a step in his life plan, which was to get out of LA, and mine was to go into visual effects supervision. So we shut down the business about a year after we planned to. During that period of time, which was 89 through 94 into early 95, the whole business changed, the whole industry changed, and digital compositing completely replaced optical compositing, and digital imaging was starting to replace things that had traditionally been done with miniatures. So it was a great time to get out. It was a great time to move on if I wanted to stay in visual effects. And so I was kind of lucky with that timing. And as it happened, our biggest clients, as we sort of moved towards the latter half of the company's life, were big digital companies that didn't want to invest in a model shop. So, but they still needed us.
Yeah.
So we did some huge projects for Rhythm and Hughes and for Digital Domain, and ultimately when we closed the company, I sold all the model shop equipment with Bob to Digital Domain, and they hired me separately as a supervisor. My first show happened to be The Fifth Element, and honestly, when I started there, they handed me the script, and I knew nothing about Luc Besson or his work, and I read this script, and I was kind of flabbergasted because it just seemed so bad. And they wouldn't give me the script. I mean, Luc wouldn't let me read the script until I had to go over to London to meet him, and he wouldn't give me the script until I was literally walking on the jetway. So one of his office reps, met me at the airport, and when I handed in my boarding pass to the attendant at the jetway, they handed me the script. I walked on the plane, read it twice on the way to meet Luke, and I thought, oh my God, what have I got myself in? But we all know where that movie went. It just became this amazing fantasy icon, and I earned the BAFTA for that, my first overall supervision project. That was pretty cool.
Those projects alone are worthy of all this thing that we just talked about with Star Trek and more. I mean, Blade Runner is tremendously popular with the fans and modelers, with all the cool vehicles and all the stuff that had in it.
That was a great project. That really was a great project.
Have you heard anything, or they're going to be, there's rumor about a reboot on that?
Yeah, they keep talking
Harrison
about Blade
Ford
Runner
has been
2.
talking about it lately.
It could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Guess we'll just have to wait and see if the stars align.
Mm-hmm.
Some projects I think are best left alone personally.
Yeah.
But,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we need a Blade Runner 2. But I'd much rather see Hollywood get some courage and start making some more original stories rather than sequels.
And with the new Star Trek, I didn't think we needed a Wrath of Khan 2, which was one of what the new films was about. Yeah. Revisiting the.
I have to say, I thought the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek was the best Star Trek I ever saw. I thought it was really great. I liked our Enterprise design better, but barring that, I thought it was a really great story and very exciting. And I just thought it was really fun.
And it was an original script. It wasn't rehashing any of the old episodes or anything like that.
They missed it a little bit on the new Khan, but still a good movie. Just I thought that
it's a different.
Ricardo Montalban was a little bit more charismatic as an enemy,
Yeah.
My second project with Digital Domain was kind of interesting because it gave me the opportunity to do something that, as I was doing it, I recognized that it wasn't going to come around very often anymore. And that was to build another spaceship, and it was a terrible movie. It was Supernova. Walter Hill directed it and took his name off it. It was just nothing but problems by the end of in production. He was hired like 6 weeks before they started shooting. He was fired before he turned in his director's cut, and I think everybody at MGM had been fired by the time the thing was done, except one guy, and he was too sick to be a part of the movie. So it was just a big political mess, and it showed up on the screen. But we built a really cool spaceship for it, and sort of alluding back to what I was talking about earlier with the value that we can continue to bring to visual effects with our experiences in the physical world. We built about I think it was 19 feet long miniature of this spaceship. It was really cool. It had a rotating section in it, and a lot of the design had been laid out by the production designer Mark Dobrovolsky, but there was a lot that we could bring to it too, and so Ron Gress was part of the design of that. It was a beautiful miniature. It's a lot of silver parts with stainless steel glowing, and I promised Bill Neal that I'd bring him a can of dulling spray, or a case of dulling spray, when I brought the model to the stage, which he used only very gently. And he shot, and in the movie it was shot with long lenses, so he shot this beautiful miniature. He designed it to look good with long lenses, and then shot it with long lenses, and it was very unusual to shoot miniatures that way, and it worked really well. Then we built, and this is the important thing, is we built a digital replica of it. So Bill shot about half the shots with the miniature, and we did about half the shots with a digital replica of it. And what the miniature gave the digital team was guidance. Bill did a great job lighting it, and the filmed elements of it looked great. And the digital shots as long as, all they had to do was match what Bill did. And it was a huge challenge. It sounds simple, but it really pushed that whole team forward and gave them something to just know what stuff is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to look at that film right now, I would not be able to tell you which was which. So, you know, when you talk about digital work, it's really down to the tools. I remember in those early days hearing directors say, "I hate blue screen." And, you know, it's something that we always heard. And now we hear, "I hate CG," you know, from directors that are auteurs. And they you know, maybe a young auteur really knows nothing about filmmaking yet,
Right.
and thinks he can shoot all that stuff. And back then, you know, I remember the rebuttal was, "You don't hate blue screen, you hate bad blue screen, because those are the ones you see."
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, it's, you don't hate CG, you just hate bad CG, because it's the only ones you see.
Right.
So I really think that, you know, it's how you use the tools.
It is.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation with you guys, and I really want to say on behalf of a lot of the fans out there and a lot of the modeling guys out there, that it's been a wonderful opportunity to sit down and talk to you guys. It's invaluable information. I hope it expands. I hope you guys do maybe consider doing something on the convention circuit or something like that. I think the interest is there. I think people would be thrilled to have you guys there and hear the stories. And I think it's tremendously important that the tools, I kind of compare, like, say, a blacksmith, the knowledge that he had and the skills and the things in the trade, that continues to be remembered and continues to be something that shows that, kind of like a little bit what we were talking about off camera, is that I think it's very important that people work with their hands and they create in a certain way, even though the digital is all important and everything, but the physical creation of art and things like that is still really important. And the work that you guys did on this film is going to help to preserve that for a long time, so we really appreciate that.
It was a unique moment in time, and we were lucky to be there. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's a magic moment.
It was a magic moment.
Is there anything anybody wants to add in closing this up?
Where's the best bar?